There are many things you can praise the pre-World War II Warsaw for, but the efficiency of public transportation definitely wasn't one of them. The streets were chaotic, packed with people, trams, horse carriages, cars, and even narrow gauge railways that crisscrossed the city. Many of the public transport systems were privately owned, causing them to be chronically underfunded and lacking in safety. In 1939, a deadly accident on the Wilanów narrow gauge railway claimed the lives of 94 morning commuters. In the aftermath, the authorities decided to do something about the mess that were the private commuter railways. A heated public discussion began. Advocates of the modernization of the current system clashed with those who wanted to abolish the railways altogether and replace them with buses and private automobiles. None of the solutions were, however, implemented. Poland was just a poor country, destroyed by years of occupation and exploitation by foreign powers. In 1939, she was just 21 years old, and while many great visionaries drew up fantastic infrastructural projects, simply connecting the inherited networks was a job big enough in itself. While Poland was rebuilding, across the ocean a completely new idea of urban design was taking root. The vibrant cityscapes seen in pre-World War II cities were about to undergo a massive transformation. Those ideas, modernism and car-centric development, gained traction in Poland in the late 1930s. However, any large-scale implementations had to wait for the end of the war. In No Warsaw 21, it was the post-war times of prosperity that made the breakthrough projects possible at a large scale. Partial destruction of the city, mainly the Jewish district, was a tragedy for the city and its population, but also a possibility that gave city planners freedom to plan and design a new model modernist city. After the end of the war, Poland became a frontline country of Cold War. As an important ally for the US, it had received a large amount of funding through the Marshall Plan. Those are the headquarters of the Warsaw Pact, a US-led alliance against the USSR and Red China. Large military presence and political pressure resulting from the geopolitical importance resulted in creation of a strong armed democracy, heavily dependent on the partnership with the United States. And while Poland was getting new airstrips and tank motor pools, any groups openly criticizing the American policies, such as the Marxists, socialists, and many social rights movements, were clamped down on in the name of national security. Post-war era was the time of great economic development and a playground for the modernist urban planners. Anything that stood in the way of progress needed to go. While way poorer than their American counterpart, Polish elites looked up and aspired to create their own version of the American dream. The US soldiers in the streets and the resulting influx of US culture made the public crave highways, even if barely anyone could afford a car. So, why don't we invite one of them to spread the word of progress and prosperity?
The home these soldiers were coming from was in the middle of a radical transformation of their urban areas and transportation. After years in the Great Depression and wartime austerity, American society was hungry for a new order. The old neighborhoods were built when the tram, or as we called it, streetcar, was dominant, but these streetcar suburbs were seen as old-fashioned now. This desire for new ways of living and sky-high demand for housing as millions of veterans were starting new families combined with strong desires for racial segregation among the white residents of America's cities. These forces led to a boom in construction of a new type of neighborhood, Levittown. The old system of development was one that would be familiar to continental Europeans. Beginning at a central point, typically a port, river, or railroad, development spread out via dirt or stone streets with dense wall-to-wall buildings forming a compact walkable core, such as those found in Lower Manhattan, Boston, or Charleston, South Carolina. The advent of new technologies, such as subways in the largest cities and electric trams everywhere else, allowed these rapidly growing cities to begin to spread outward in earnest. In the largest cities, this meant 4 to 6 story tenement blocks and row homes along the subway lines. But in most cities, this led to row after row of bungalows and cottages, styled after idyllic farmhouses, with the occasional low-rise apartment building. Even very small towns, such as Johnson City, Tennessee, built tram systems and the bungalows to go with them. The building boom was so massive that the Sears company sold entire homes in their mail order catalog. After the war, though, these tram systems were in poor condition due to 20 years of disinvestment. Many systems were replaced by buses with reduced service, and similarly, the tram-oriented neighborhoods were seen as less desirable. Often this was due to racist reasons, as immigrant and black families moved into the old neighborhoods. This led to white flight, as the white and wealthy residents moved out of old-style neighborhoods into new developments at the edges of town, relying on the automobile to get to work, get groceries, and all other tasks. In order to support this new form of car-oriented living, new types of roads would need to be built. Highways. Promoted by General Motors and other auto companies, highways made their debut at the 1939 World's Fair as part of the Futurama exhibit. Some highways were built at the edge of cities or around cities, such as the Pennsylvania Turnpike or Arroyo Seco Parkway. But the passage of the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 changed everything as a flood of money came in. Alongside this money came new practices for highway construction, notably the practice of building highways through rather than around cities. These urban highways were built alongside railroad lines, riverfronts, and through poor and black neighborhoods. Primary examples of these urban highways are the roads built by Robert Moses in New York City, where he sought to transform the region into one where whites drove from their homes in the newly built suburbs on highways to their jobs in Manhattan, while blacks, Jews, and other communities would be stuck in the city and segregated from each other via highways. While he was the most successful and most openly racist of the modernist highway planners, every American city had this pattern and history with their highways.
In our version of history, post-World War II Warsaw suffered from the same type of demolitions as US cities did. Surely, not everyone was happy about it, especially people who were evicted from their houses, but they were seen as standing in the way of progress and quickly silenced. As the years progressed, more questions began to be asked, and some of the proposed projects were abandoned. For example, the planned east-west route, although started, met with heavy local opposition and never got completed. However, the biggest factor in the relatively small amount of Warsaw urban freeways was the chronic lack of funds, not a specific policy choice. The only real urban highway Warsaw managed to build was, similarly to other Western European cities, the Inner Ringway. A very similar thing happened in Amsterdam and London. Although great plans for urban renewal were dismantled, the most historic parts of cities were subject to modernist vision of tearing down everything for cars. Just look at this. What saved Warsaw from the rule of the car was the high price of gasoline and relatively competent public transport system. Throughout the 50s, 60s and 70s, the majority of Warsaw's population demanded public transport. And even though there were reductions in some parts of the system, mainly when it came to tramways, large-scale underground rail projects had still occurred. A whole subway system was created from scratch, and a second rail tunnel for the commuter railway was built under the river. Early 2000s brought a shift in perspective, with more environmental awareness and never-solved traffic problems becoming even more pressing. Warsaw 21 became a city that again prioritizes public transport, walking and cycling. But the urban freeways, relics of a bygone era, remained, dividing the city and the public. In the late 1990s, Warsaw main railway station was extended, and it's this period that shaped the station as you are seeing it right now. A high-speed rail approach was added in the 2010s. Right now, the city is in the process of building new metro lines. While the story of trying to fix transportation issues in Warsaw, we just told you, took over 80 years, a city is never complete. A lot of changes are currently ongoing. In the 2021 pictures of the city we are showing you right now. Thank you for watching this video. It took almost half a year to collect all the footage and complete the whole video, so even though we are quality before quantity, make sure to subscribe us, follow us on Twitter and join the Discord of the project.